It's good to see everyone tonight. Kind of cold night to be out, but certainly nice in here. You recall that Saul was granted the privilege of being the first king of the nation of Israel. And 1 Samuel chapter 18 shows how the relationship between Saul and the young man David kind of turned sour and rather quickly. You remember David had killed Goliath. He saved the armies of Israel. Of course, God used David to save the armies of Israel. And of course, Saul at first was pleased. Who is this young man? You know, he was thrilled. David had gotten rid of their great enemy, Goliath the giant. But then Saul began to hear the women, and what were they saying? You know, Saul has killed his thousands, but David has killed his 10,000s. And they were praising David, they were bragging, and rather than being happy for David, Saul was jealous. Not only was he jealous, he became angry with David, and he began to watch David and to suspect that David was out to steal the throne. And within time, Saul clearly counted David an enemy. And you recall that on more than one occasion, he tried to take David's life with a spear. Now fast forward to the 24th chapter of 1 Samuel. Here we see a clear distinction between the character of David and the character of Saul. At this point, and we only have a few minutes, so I'm just giving you the highlights here, the Reader's Digest version, I guess. But David is out with 400 men who are his followers, and they're basically roaming through the wilderness, trying to stay a step ahead of Saul. And Saul hears where David is camped. He goes out, and he thinks he's going to finally have the opportunity to kill his enemy. But instead, it turns out to be just the opposite, because David had the opportunity to kill Saul, and yet he doesn't do it. And you can't help but think, as you read that story of David, when he had the opportunity, Saul's asleep, and David is standing there beside him with a spear, and I'm sure he had a sword as well, and he had a guard with him, and he could have so easily taken Saul's life. But yet he refused to do it. And I think there are a couple of lessons we can learn from the fact that David spared Saul's life. First of all, David had great respect for the authority of Saul as the anointed king of Israel. In fact, you remember David cut off the corner of the king's robe there as proof that he could have killed him. But even after he did it, he began to feel guilty. And if you look at verse 6 of chapter 24, when first of all they tried to get David to kill him, he said, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch out my hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord." David recognized that even though Saul was trying to kill him, even though Saul considered David an enemy, David understood it was not his job to extract vengeance, to kill Saul. He knew that if it was God's will, God would take care of Saul in due time. And you know, in much the same way, we've got to respect our enemies. Not that they're anointed by God like Saul was, but we need to respect our enemies. We may not like them. We may not want to be with them, to spend a lot of time with them, but we don't have to get down on their level and try to extract vengeance ourselves. We should always live by the Christian standard every time we can. And again, another lesson we see here as we look at David when he spared the life of Saul, he returned good for evil. Saul begged David, the last time they met, not to kill his family. And many times people read that and wonder, well, why would he ask that? You know, why would David? Well, you've got to understand that for years, conquering kings, it was quite common for them to destroy, to wipe out all of the offspring of their enemy. Because if you kill the king and his son or his grandson goes up, they might try to reclaim power. And so it was just customary for the conquering king to destroy not only the king, but all, at least, of the male heirs. And Saul was afraid that David would do this, and David, of course, promises him that he will not do that. David was not afraid for his throne, and he wasn't going to hold Saul's descendants accountable for what Saul had done to him. And so in spite of the fact that David was not a perfect man, in spite of the fact that David sinned with Bathsheba, and there were other occasions when he disobeyed or did things he shouldn't have done, David still had a godly heart. In fact, in the New Testament, we're told that he was a man after God's own heart. And we could spend time talking about what's meant by that phrase. But the fact is, David left a good example, especially in regard to the way that we treat our enemies or the way that we react to those who were trying to hurt us or do things to us. I think a good lesson are good lessons that we can learn from him. But tonight, if you're not a Christian, you can become one. Coming in faith, repenting of your sins, and making that good confession that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and being immersed in water for the forgiveness of your sins that you might be added to His body, the church. Tonight, if you're subject to this invitation, if you want to become a Christian, or if you need to be restored as a wayward Christian, you can do that as well. Why not come while together as we stand and we sing?